Good evening and welcome to the Cabarrus County Board of Education's Monday night, August the 16th, 2021 specially called meeting. We'll say hello to our viewing audience. We have already, I've called the meeting to order. We have just reconvened from closed session. So I would ask board members that I have a motion that we amend the agenda to add action items and verbiage to item 6.01, including a resolution, and also 12.01, adding a resolution.
So moved.
I'd like to ask for another amendment to the agenda. I'd like to add for an action item being for 11.02 to be added to the agenda for possible vote on the mask for a mask vote.
Okay, and I will read that back to you just to make sure we are clear. So we're going to make a motion that we amend the agenda to add action items for verbiage to 6.01, also to 11.0, add 11.02 for a motion regarding mandatory mask, and then action item 12.01 for the verbiage and resolution. Hearing a motion, may I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion by Ms. Carpenter and a second by Ms. Adcock. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes 7-0. And with that, I will ask that we all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now I think we owe the viewing audience an apology. Our flag is normally in the back, so everyone by habit tends to go that direction, so we apologize for that. And with that being said, now that the agenda has been set, we will move to items under number 6, which is our action items. I would ask for a motion for the approval of the superintendent's contract and the resolution.
So moved.
I have a motion by Ms. Blackwell, a second by Mr. Furr. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. And with that, I will ask, well, first I guess we should welcome Dr. Kopicki to the dais. And if you will join me at the podium, we will start the swearing-in ceremony. Everybody good? Okay. So, absolutely, yes. And with your left hand up. No, right hand on the, there we go. Okay. So it's please place your right hand on the Bible. Hold your left hand up and repeat after me. I, John Joseph Kopicki, do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States,
I, John Joseph Kopicki, do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States,
that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to the state of North Carolina and to the constitutional powers and authorities which are or may be established for the government thereof.
that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to the state of North Carolina and to the constitutional powers and authorities which are or may be established for the government thereof, and
that I will endeavor to support, maintain, and defend the Constitution of said state, not inconsistent with the Constitution of the United States, to the best of my knowledge and ability, so help me God.
that I will endeavor to support, maintain, and defend the Constitution of said state, not inconsistent with the Constitution of the United States, to the best of my knowledge and ability, so help me God.
I, John Joseph Kopicki, do solemnly swear that I will be faithful and impartially discharge the duties of my office as superintendent of the Cabarrus County Schools to the best of my skill and ability, so help me God. Last paragraph.
I, John Joseph Kopicki, do solemnly swear that I will be faithful and impartially discharge the duties of my office as superintendent of the Cabarrus County Schools to the best of my skill and ability, so help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
said, don't stop clapping. I wanted to be a part of that. Thank you. You may all be seated. And once again, we will say welcome. And we know that Dr. Kopicki has just joined us this weekend. He's actually made his move here. His family will be joining him. He's had a couple of things going on this weekend, so we hate that they were not able to be part of the festivities tonight, but we look forward to meeting them in the future. Okay? You're welcome. So with that, we will move to items number... Yes, absolutely. Yes. I will turn it over to you. It actually just push the keys you right up.
So if all of you would follow me around for the rest of the week and do that standing ovation again, I'd appreciate that. It's not often in your life that happens. So I thank you very much for your kindness and the congenial way that you've welcomed me. I appreciate it deeply. I'd like to thank the Cabarrus County Board of Education for putting their faith and trust in me. And I assure you that I will work faithfully with them and collaboratively to continue to form a good team environment that we work together for the betterment of the county schools and for all of the students here. I'd like to thank the teachers who are the bedrock of this community, who go to work every single day and help our children. And I give you my promise that I will work faithfully with you to make sure you have what you need to be successful in the classroom and to help our children succeed. And I thank you for your dedication, especially and in particular this last year, which I know was extremely difficult and stressful for all teachers across our country. So I thank you for your dedication, your service, and I look forward to working with you. I want to thank all of the administrators, especially all of you that came here today. You are not getting paid for this, so that was a joke. You can laugh, okay? But I thank you for coming tonight. I know you have family obligations and personal obligations and things that go on in your life, and I know this is a bit of an inconvenience for you to be here this evening, so I do appreciate you being here this evening and offering your support to myself and the Board of Education. Deeply appreciate it, and I will not forget that. To the support staff, to the parents, and especially to the students of our community, I promise you'll get my best, and you'll continue to get the best that you have received over the many years that Cabarrus County Schools has been in existence. That's been demonstrated. Your excellence precedes you in everything that you do. My pledge to you is that I'm going to work very hard to work together to earn your trust and to earn your faith in my leadership. And I want to emphasize our leadership because it's the Board of Education, it's the superintendent, it's the administrators, it's the teachers, it's the community that make a system function well. And I don't miss that mark. I understand that very well, and I promise you that we will continue to do that here in the Cabarrus County school systems. Special thank you to Sarah Hammonds, Karina Neville, and Brian Schultz. All three of them have been great in getting me acclimated here in the district and working with me to make sure that I settle in appropriately, I guess I would say. But navigating the system, there's a large curve here to learn and pick up, and they've been great in helping me. I want to commend Brian Schultz for his leadership on an interim basis. Brian has been a tremendous leader in the school district, has done an outstanding job, and has been nothing less than professional to me since I have accepted this position. Brian, you're an outstanding individual and a great leader, and I appreciate all the efforts that you've made for me to be successful here as my start begins. So thank you. To my family, my wife, and my children, I thank them. Even though they're not here, I appreciate their love and support. They have obligations that kind of preceded this, believe it or not, but I appreciate their love and support. It means a lot to me that I take this step and their support is with me. And I would say to all of you, if you see me out and about in the community, stop, introduce yourself, take some time to talk with me, tell me what your thoughts are, tell me what you like, tell me what you don't like. Be honest with me, and I promise you that you'll get a good ear to listen to you. And I encourage you to reach out and touch base with me as often as you need to. But please do, if you see me out, please introduce yourself. I look forward to seeing all of you. You'll see me at school events, community events. You'll see me at games, assemblies, plays. You'll see me in your stores, your shops. You'll see me in church. So I will be an active participant of the community, and I look forward to being that. So again, when you see me out and about, please do reach out and touch base with me. And then finally, I would say to you, as we move forward into a new school year, which begins next week, I would just ask all of you to remain respectful and patient with each other and with us, and continue to work together to continue the excellence that is the hallmark of the Cabarrus County school system. You will always get my best, and I have no doubt that I will get your best as well. So again, thank you very much for the wonderful welcome, and I look forward to a great partnership with all of you as we move forward to start the school year. So thank you, and thank you again to the Board of Education. It would be remiss of me too also to not thank Jay White and his family for all the wonderful things they've done for me too in the last couple of weeks and helped me get settled here. So I thank all of you, and let's get started.
Okay, now at this time, we will move to items under number 8, which is actually a recess for a reception for our superintendent. So we will take that break now and reconvene shortly. Thank you. For everyone that's Good evening, and we will say welcome back to our viewing audience of our Cabarrus County Board of Education's Monday night special called meeting for August the 16th, 2021. The Board of Education has just recessed for the reception, welcoming our new superintendent, Dr. John Kopicki. And with that, we will move to items under number 10, which are board chair and superintendent comments. And I just want to make the comment that, number one, we've welcomed you, but we would like to take an opportunity to say that again. I'll give board members an opportunity to make a comment if you'd like to do that. And I'll start with Ms. Adcock.
Yes, I'd just like to welcome Dr. Kopicki to the Cabarrus County School System, and we are looking very forward to working with you.
Ms. Carpenter.
Same here, John. We want to welcome you and your family, and we look forward to many years of working with you, and anything that I know I or myself or I'm sure the board can do for you, we are more than happy to do that.
Mr. Furr.
Yes, sir. Welcome to Cabarrus County, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy your time. We look forward to having you.
Mr. Walter.
Just want to say I appreciated your opening statement. I think that was a great, got us off on a good foot and a great start, and I appreciate it.
Ms. Blackwell.
So I will say the same. I've been nothing but impressed every time that we've gotten the opportunity to talk to you. It's nice to finally get to see you in person. We are happy that you are bringing your wife down here and you guys are going to start your life in Cabarrus County. And we are happy to introduce you to all the folks around the county and get you involved. But it's great to see you with your humor, and I couldn't work with anybody that didn't have a sense of humor, and so I'm grateful to see that you have that, and roll tide.
Ms. Sandage.
I don't know about the roll tide part, but I appreciate you joining us, John. I truly appreciate what you said in your opening statement to all of the staff that we have in the district, just letting them know you're here and available to talk with them. I like what you said to our community, giving them the opportunity to come and reach out and touch you and say, hey, this is what I see going on. Hey, can you? I really appreciate that. So it's good to know that if you're in this community, you have a superintendent who you can reach out and touch, and he wants to hear from you, and he wants to respond to what you feel like we can do better here. So thank you and welcome aboard.
Okay, thank you. And with that, I would just like to say this is the first day back for teachers, and we hope that you all had a great day and got a good start on your beginning of the week, that students return Monday, August the 23rd. I'm going to give Dr. Kopicki an opportunity to make a statement or any additional comments you'd like to have, if you would like to do that this time, or if you've said all you need to say for a little bit.
Again, I thank everyone for the warm welcome, especially the Board of Education. I look forward to working with everyone here, and I'm excited to get started. So thank you very much.
Okay, and with that, we will move to items under number 11.01, which is our COVID-19 data and information update, and I will turn it over to Mr. Brian Schultz.
All right, good evening, everyone. Dr. Kopicki, welcome. It's been a pleasure to get to know you here over this short period of time, and really admire you already, and look forward to working with you during these next couple of weeks. So thank you very much for making everyone feel so comfortable today. All right, so let's dig into the COVID-19 facts and data. So we'll go back, kind of take a look at bigger picture at the North Carolina daily cases. As you all know, we had a large pickup in cases after the holidays and into the new year, and you kind of see that major spike there just shortly into December. You'll see we are in another major spike right now, and as of last Thursday, 5,900 cases in one day across the state of North Carolina. I also see the daily percent of positive tests in North Carolina. North Carolina actually reports it daily. Cabarrus County Schools reports it weekly. So you'll see it the last day on the 9th was at 12.8% positive in North Carolina. You also see the hospitalizations increase sharply over the month of July from 451 cases, more than quadrupling to August 10th at 2,304 cases. And we look at these data trends, so we look at down the column of new cases, and I'd particularly point out probably the last 3 weeks on this. You know, yes, from June 6, 46 to 887 new cases each week, and that's not cumulative, so that is each week. But just look at the pickup over since July 25th. So we've more than almost tripled the number of cases in just a 3-week span per week. We also see that percent positive over the last 3 weeks going from 8.6 to 12.9. And then we also look at the active cases that have almost tripled in the last 3 weeks as well. So while back on that graph, when you look at the state daily cases where we saw a progressive kind of leap over time, we've seen a really steep increase in a very short period of time here across the state and in Cabarrus County. So again, this is Cabarrus County data. And then looking at our school-age students, who typically are 5 to 18, you'll see in the last 4 weeks since July 4th to August 1st, that spike from 11 cases the week of July 4th to now 117 cases in our 5 to 17-year-olds. And you'll see the 18-year-olds really remain pretty flat until the last couple of weeks, where we've seen a slight increase in 18-year-olds as well. The percent positive, so this is of all the tests administered. If you look at that last bar, that's around 5,000 tests were administered. Of those 5,000 tests that were administered, right at 13%, 12.9% of those came back. So if to put that in perspective, if you have 1,000 tests, then 130 come back as positive. So multiply that by 5 for how many we had the week of August, I think that's 7th. And we see our rate at 12.9%. And again, you see kind of that, you look back at the October to December timeframe, it's kind of a jagged incline up and down, where we see it's a straight shot up from where we were back in July in terms of percent positive. The number of hospitalizations, this is as of Sunday, yesterday. We were at 34 Cabarrus residents, and we have 100 total hospitalized in the COVID unit at Cabarrus Atrium. When we look at vaccinations, if you look at the left side of the screen, that's your percent of your eligible population. So that are your 12-year-old and up. So of the 12-year-old and older, 53.4% of Cabarrus County has been partially vaccinated, and then slightly less than that have been fully vaccinated at 49.2%. If we look at the total population, so that's from birth to however old everyone is, so birth on up, we have, of our total population, we have partially vaccinated at 45% and fully vaccinated at 41%. And we look at our task force indicators, we see that we have no items in the containment column. In the moderate to accelerated community spread is the Cabarrus resident hospitalizations at 31. So that is the one indicator on this slide that is in the moderate to accelerated community spread. And then where the items in the tipping point of community spread are all the others, cases per day, per 100,000 people over the last 14 days. Cases per day in Cabarrus County, that's the average. We're sitting right at 100. New cases in the last 14 days in Cabarrus County, 1,400 new cases in the last 14 days, again 12.9%. And then we look at the weekly cases, which we looked at earlier in the 5 to 17-year-olds, but then also their caretakers, which is metric 7 of the 25 to 64-year-old. 64-year-olds are at 410 cases. And then lastly, these metrics will really pertain more to when we start traditional school here on Monday. But at this point, we have not had evidence of transmission within the school building or schools that have had to go to virtual because of an outbreak or any levels of concern for staffing at this point. I think it's important to know, in thinking about the pandemic over the last 18 to 20 months, that we've learned a lot. We've learned about what what the virus does, how it mutates. We know that we learned last week that there's a lot of genetic material in the virus, which makes it easier to mutate. And, I would just say that, I think that there's still a lot to learn about it. But one of the things that a lot of sources that we use for guidance about the COVID-19 virus, and we're learning as we go along. So what we know now is not what we knew 12 months ago. And we are informed by American Academy of Pediatrics, we're informed by the CDC, we're informed by the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, and we're also informed by the ABC Science Collaborative. And I know I've talked about the ABC Science Collaborative a lot. I joke and say that it's the only time Duke and University of North Carolina have ever agreed on anything and come together, but that's probably not true, but they did. The University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and Duke University have come together to study our own folks, to study our own students here in North Carolina, and that took place as an act of legislation in March from our own state legislators, and they studied the students who came back to school. In North Carolina, there was a mandate for a Plan A option for all students in every school across North Carolina. There was also a mandate that every school district submits data to the ABC Collaborative so they can understand interaction of students, how far apart they are or are not, their interactions on buses, and then the transmission of COVID within schools and on buses and in athletics. So we learned a lot through that collaborative. There were somewhere way over 1 million students. Data was not their own personal data, but the data about how COVID was transmitted or not in schools, and we had to submit that every week. So this ABC Science Collaborative studied that, and they actually had 9 key takeaways from what they learned over that really 3 months that they studied all the students coming back to school. And I'll give you 5. They had 9 of them, but I would encourage you to go on and read the report. They had 9 key takeaways, but I wanted to lift up 5 of those. So that's adhere to proper masking. It's the most effective mitigation strategy to prevent secondary transmission in schools when COVID-19 is circulating and vaccination is unavailable or there is insufficient uptake. So that was one of their key takeaways, that what they found in schools, that transmission was low and that it was helpful and it was the most effective mitigating strategy within schools. Modify quarantine. So one of the things that I've heard people celebrate, but I've also heard people heckle, is that we keep modifying quarantines. But there's a reason for that. It's because we keep learning new information. And so one of their key takeaways was to modify quarantine. So where last year, if you remember, we quarantined everybody for 14 days, period. That was our guidance. That was what we got. People didn't like that. But we learned, and so what they have done is is encouraged to modify quarantine. So we, as Cabarrus County Schools, actually tested that out per the CDC allowance, per the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, actually tested that out over our summer Jumpstart school this summer. And what we found is that we could quarantine when a student had been vaccinated, they could quarantine for 0 days. If after 5 days they didn't have symptoms, they could be tested, and then if their test was negative, they could come back to school after 7 days. And if they didn't want to be tested, then they were symptom-free, and that was verified, then they could come back to school after 10 days. So that quarantine was modified. We did not have any transmission in Summer Jumpstart as a result of any of those modified quarantines, and have now applied that to this coming school year as recommended in the North Carolina Strong Schools Toolkit. So that has been modified. They also had the key takeaways of that physical distancing should not be the limiting factor for determining in-person instruction when appropriate adherence to masking is present. So we actually see that actually showed up in the recommendation in the North Carolina Strong Schools Toolkit. So again, another takeaway from the ABC Collaborative that's actually been applied and recommended in the Strong Schools Toolkit. And then to continue the standard cleaning practices. So we heard I think I heard the term deep cleaning about 52,000 times in the last 18 months. So although we are still cleaning high-touch surfaces and we are still cleaning surfaces between when different students are at tables or at desks, they are recommending to continue standard cleaning practices. What they're learning is that hard surfaces, foods, and things like that, COVID-19 is not easily transmissible through those objects. And then lastly, one of their key takeaways was to provide access to symptomatic testing. Now again, they didn't say require symptomatic testing. They said provide access to symptomatic testing and testing after exposure. Symptomatic students and staff should be tested promptly. So that's been a topic of discussion. Well, I want to test right away. Well, if you don't have symptoms, the COVID-19 virus can take 4 to 7, 8 days to incubate sometimes. So testing too early could actually result in showing that somebody's negative when they're actually positive. So that's why the recommendation on the return to school in terms of quarantine is as after 5 days, then you receive that test. But if you're symptomatic, they recommend testing immediately. And so I mentioned last week in my presentation to the board that we've have a state vendor. Their name is Concentric, and we're working on a plan to ensure that anyone that wants to has access to those testing, either a PCR or a rapid test. And we'll be rolling the detailed information out once our plan is approved with Concentric with that. So, and again, those are a service to the community. They're optional tests. They don't cost us any money. We don't receive money for it. And they are, it's a service to our community, but not required and require parent permission. So clarification that we received last week from the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services is about distancing, or actually lack thereof. So you'll see that here shortly. So this is pulled, actually paraphrased and pulled from the North Carolina Strong Schools Toolkit. And so quarantine is required for an individual who has been a close contact within 6 feet for 15 minutes over a 24-hour period. So we know that language. That language is familiar to us. That's how we quarantined last school year, 6 feet, 15 minutes, 6 feet, 15 minutes. We said it a lot. We practiced it a lot. We did it a lot. And that's an exposure or close contact with someone who is determined positive with COVID-19. All right, so that's the standard. So again, think about that as the standard. And then it says with the following exceptions. And there's 3 exceptions to that. So the first one is individuals who are fully vaccinated and do not have symptoms do not need to quarantine after a close contact. So if you're fully vaccinated, you do not have symptoms, you do not need to quarantine after a close contact. The second exception to the 6 feet, 15 minutes is people who have tested positive for COVID-19 within the past 3 months and recovered and do not have symptoms. So those people do not have to quarantine. And then the third exception, and this was the clarification that came from North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services last week, is that, and it links back to the ABC Collaborative takeaway. So students who are not fully vaccinated have a close contact, who are not fully vaccinated after a close contact in a classroom or other school testing, if masks were being worn appropriately and consistently by both the person with COVID-19 and the potentially exposed person, do not need to quarantine. So distance does not come into play there. So if I'm 1 foot from someone who is COVID-19 positive and we are both masked appropriately, then there is no quarantine. There is isolation for the person that has COVID-19, but there is not a quarantine if masks are being worn properly. So if you remember last week, I showed you this graphic, and what you'll notice there up on the right-hand side, it says the previous guidance until we got the clarification from NCDHHS was the school exception was 3 to 6 feet. And that was the previous guidance that we got. So you can see the student who's positive has the mask. Students who are not vaccinated or vaccinated, they did not have to quarantine. But the updated guidance that I'm sharing with you now is the school exception is distancing is not a factor if wearing a mask appropriately. So you see the graphic, that's updated guidance per NCDHHS. So some additional topics I wanted to share with you a little bit. So I did talk about the COVID-19 testing. We are submitting that, the names of our schools, the contact people, the number of students at each school, the type of PCR or rapid test that we're requesting for each school. That will be submitted tomorrow to Concentra, which they're also known as Ginkgo, but they will be receiving our plan and approving that. And as soon as they give approval to that plan, then we will begin that. So I don't have an estimated date yet on the testing, but I will promise you that we will be one of the first ones at the front of the line receiving that. So that more information will come out from the schools regarding that. And then lunch and breakfast is kind of a hot topic. Well, that is a time when students are obviously not masked. And so how do we plan on addressing that? So we've worked with our school nutrition department. Stephanie Allman, who leads that, has worked with our principals to give them various options in terms of service. So they all will still go through the lunch line or the breakfast line, but it'll be a portable lunch. So they can travel anywhere to the building that their teacher guides them. That could be outside, it could be back to their classroom, it could be to an open area where they can safely distance, preferably 3 feet or more during lunchtime to be able to eat their lunch safely. We will utilize the cafeteria as well, but not seated as close. If you're side by side in the cafeteria, you're less than 3 feet apart. So we will be utilizing all the areas in the building. Lunch will be served in a way that it's more portable, because there's nothing more scary than watching a kindergartner carry a lunch tray and trying to balance that and juggle that with that. The milk carton's always a little bit heavier, and so that's a dangerous prospect of sometimes even kindergartners getting back to their cafeteria table. So we made it in a way so that it will be portable, grab and go type, so they will be able to then go to a location where they can distance. So those are the additional topics I wanted to make sure that I covered, and at this time I'll conclude the presentation and turn it back over to Ms. Grimsley.
Okay, and with that, I will ask for board members' comments or questions, and I will start with Ms. Sandage.
Can you come back to me?
Sure, Ms. Blackwell.
Sure. All right. So the information that you gave regarding the hospitalizations, 34 of the hospitalized were Cabarrus County patients. Is that right? And then you
Cabarrus
said
residents.
Cabarrus residents. And then the COVID unit, you said were how many? 100 and?
It was 100 reported yesterday.
Okay. Do we know of those patients that were on the COVID unit, if they were there strictly for COVID, or were they placed there because they came to the hospital for other issues first and then were tested positive and had to be placed on the COVID unit?
Yeah, so that information is reported on the CHA website, and then we also receive an update from Atrium Health on Mondays with a community call. They did not go into that level of specificity today about that. I will say last week when there were, it was around 80 patients that were in there, they did not give that level of information either. They did provide like vaccination status of the patients that they had, but did not go into that level of detail.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Walter.
Thanks again, Brian, for the presentation. Just clarifying questions and helping me understand. So the quarantine, to do that, it takes staff time to figure out who had a mask, who didn't. And you're saying if everybody has a mask, then that's not necessary? Is that what you're saying?
That's correct, yeah. So if everybody is masked, then there would be very little contact tracing. So if somebody, wasn't wearing it properly or something, and that was reported for over a period of more than 15 minutes, then that would be investigated. But it would essentially, it wouldn't totally eliminate contact tracing, but it would come really close to eliminating that, so that our teachers, administrators, school nurses can focus on our core business of school, which is teaching and learning, and not contact tracing.
Okay, so assuming that they didn't have masks on, then we would all have to find out the contact tracing, who they were with, what classes, and.
Yeah, and that takes a substantial amount of time. I think last week I talked about, so you imagine a high school, 4 periods a day, a student travels through all 4 classes. I think the example that I gave last week where, if 9 students were exposed or 6 students were exposed per class, 4 periods a day, it's a minimum 24 students. They ride the bus in the morning, they ride the bus in the afternoon, sit around different kids. Now we're assuming that they're masked on the bus, but now that there's no distancing, because the bus is questionable, it's 2 to 3 feet typically, so there might have to be some quarantines based on the bus. And if, so it depends on where they travel in the day, who they sit by during lunchtime. There's a lot of video pulling.
So it takes a lot of time to figure out
Parent
that stuff.
calling, nurses involved, administrators are involved, yes.
And then again, if a student is quarantined, we don't have the virtual option anymore, right?
That's correct. So I presented the instructional approach that we have last week to you all, that includes Canvas and assignments and video supports, and also office hours for teachers, but not live streaming instruction.
The school toolkit, it just applies for classroom settings, or is that?
It's applied for classroom settings, yes.
So the folks here at
in
the
school settings.
admin office or transportation, they wouldn't have to necessarily follow this guidance?
They would, I'll have to get clarification on that. If it's, if students are not in the building, let me double check on that one. I'm not sure.
Okay. And then last week we had a speaker talk to us about what they're doing, I guess, at Walmart, and having some metrics. And we talked about maybe the task force getting together to talk about that. Did the task force discuss what possible metric there could be?
I'm going to convene the metrics team, send them the sample that is actually Ashley Price was the name of the lady that suggested that, and she had a potential metrics for when masks could be eliminated, when they could be optional, when they should be mandatory. So I'm going to pull her into the metrics subcommittee of that task force.
But we haven't done that yet?
No,
So
not
we
yet.
don't have anything for us to consider at this point? Okay, thank you.
Mr. Farr?
I have no questions or comments.
Ms. Carpenter?
Well, on our agenda, after this discussion, we have put on there about possibly 4 masks. My 2 questions would be, basically, number 1, if masks were put in place, would we for the enforcement, say a parent brought a child to school and said, okay, son or daughter, I don't want you to wear a mask, would we call that parent up and make them come back, for enforcement, if the board?
Before we called the parent, we would ask the student to give them a mask from the school, and we would ask them to wear the mask and comply with the guidance, with the mandate. If that further, because we want students to be at school, so we don't want to send them home right away. If the student failed to comply, then yes, they would have to. That would be enforced, and they would have to leave school premises.
So we are definitely, whatever, I don't know what'll happen, but I'm saying if that did, we would be enforcing our policy if that was the case.
Yes, ma'am.
The other thing, I wanted to make sure that it is understood by our viewing audience and everything, that what would be ours with the virtual academy, if it was voted in, because I know a lot of us had gotten emails with people saying that their child has a physical problem where they can't wear masks, or there was some type of thing. If you'll let our viewing audience know about what is and why we are not offering A, B, or C like we offered. You offered it last year. Why are you not doing it? If you will let our viewing audience know why or what's going on with that.
Yeah, so if there's a medical condition or or a condition that would require a student where the student would be unsafe in the typical setting, typically a condition that would be exacerbated by COVID-19 as defined by CDC, then we have a process that they could go through to apply for that exemption with Virtual Academy. And they would need to contact, they can email me directly, or they can email John Basilise directly, and we will have a staff walk them through that process.
But the other thing is, explain, it's not just, we cannot offer that really due to the state, is that
Yeah, that's
not
right.
correct?
We are not as legislated, we are not offering a virtual option at each school site. There is no more Plan A, Plan B, Plan C. It is the old version, Plan A, face-to-face instruction. That's what our curriculum instruction staff, principals, and teachers have planned for this school year, and we'll be delivering face-to-face instruction as a traditional model that we were used to pre-pandemic.
And the other thing, again, I just want to thank everybody with all the many emails that I have received, and I have read them all, and still reading some stuff, and I do want to thank everybody that sent everything, and thank you very much.
Before I move to Ms. Adcock, to Mrs. Carpenter's point, I think what she was trying to really drill down is that we are not allowed to offer a remote learning. It's not that this board or the CNI or administration does not, agree with doing that. It is that we're not allowed to by state law with the new legislature's bill that's been put in place. I think that's what she really wants you to.
Yes, we are allowed the virtual academy, and
Virtual academy, not remote learning.
Correct.
And people really get confused with that situation. So I think that's what
Correct.
she's trying to make sure people
and it's
really
important to
understand.
note too that our model for virtual academy is there is a once a week in-person component to that. So it'd be important to go to the choice programs on the website, review the protocol for that, and really understand what virtual is, because it is not all 100% live streaming. We got really used to that last year, but it is not live streaming all day long. There are asynchronous components, there are live streaming components, and there are face-to-face components to our virtual academy.
Ms. Adcock.
Just a clarifying question, and again, this is about distancing is not a factor. Is that also teacher to student? Because we talked about last time that it was 6 feet between a teacher and
Yeah,
a
so
student.
that has actually maintained in the guidance that teachers should maintain 6 feet distancing from each other and also from students, which is very challenging actually. We'll be back 100, hopefully 100% capacity, and in our lower grades. And thinking about how we teach reading, and then in our upper grades where we have larger classroom size, that is one thing that our adults in our buildings are going to be vigilant of, that 6 feet, 15 minutes exposure to students in general, while at the same time balancing best practices for in-person learning.
So to that, to what you just made your comment, so there could possibly be quarantine of teachers if they are in contact with each other.
That's correct, if they're exposed to a positive student or another positive adult.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome.
Back to Ms. Sanders.
All right, so I got a few questions, Brian, and then Jay or Jonathan, you may have to answer one of these questions. So how many students are we expecting to return to school? I know we say 100% learning, or 100% of our students are expected to return, but is there some number that we're expecting?
Yeah, we're projecting over 33,000 students, pre-K through 12 in our district, and we always say we don't really know about that exact number until about the 40th day of school, so that gets us past Labor Day, and then we start looking at where our enrollment is, but we're projected over 33,000 this school year.
And there's nothing that would have occurred before, like the start of school, that would indicate that there's going to be less than that?
No, I mean, there's always a last minute rush for people enrolling, and that's pretty typical. It's tough in a pandemic year. Our enrollment was down specifically in our K and 1 grades. That was pretty typical across the state of North Carolina. Enrollment had dropped, so it is difficult. It's a kind of a demographer's dream and a demographer's nightmare all together, because they really get to crunch numbers and analyze it, but then it's real guesswork about that. So Frances Lane, our GIS specialist, as you know, has really studied that, consulted with demographers across the nation to come up with that projection amount.
Okay, so and if there are questions about enrollment, who should people direct that to?
What type of questions?
So the
Like
question
how
that I
to?
just asked, like how many students returned to school?
Yeah, we'll give a report to the board on that
Okay.
once we get to the 40th day of school.
Okay. Has there been any discussion about temperature checks coming to school this year?
Yeah, so as part of the guidance, again, from what, we learned a lot of things last year. We learned a lot of things we liked, and we learned a lot of things we didn't like. What we learned about the temperature screenings is that for the squeeze wasn't necessarily worth the juice. We really didn't screen out a lot of students based on temperature, and I think as we've learned a lot about COVID, is that you can have COVID without having a temperature. And people can lie to you about the questions that you ask them sometimes, or maybe it might just conveniently forget the answer to those. So, so we found that all the effort and everything that went into doing the screenings, it really didn't result in much in terms of detecting students or adults with COVID. And in fact, what it did is it lessened our instructional time because it backed up car rider circle. It took more time. Again, away from our core business of teaching and learning, and sometimes in all this we forget that's our core business and our purpose of school is to make sure that we maximize every second of every day to teach our students and make sure they're making academic progress. So that was one of those that actually took away instructional time and really didn't give us much more information or make students safer because of it.
Okay. I know we don't have the plan in place right now for the rapid testing, but were you given some type of model that this group had done in a previous school system that maybe you could, summarize what that looks like and why we are going this direction?
They gave us advice. They gave us some guidance on that. We were fortunate, and they even said that we got an A+ when we finished. We were fortunate because we actually did the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services pilot testing last year. So we ended the year with about 15 schools who had already piloted tests at the school, and those were all the antigen, the rapid test that we piloted. So we had some inside knowledge that was very helpful in how we wanted to lay this plan out this year. But one of the things that I really like that this group offers is they offer PCR tests, which are your typically come back within 24 to 48 hours. They offer those, and they also offer the rapid test. And they highly recommend for students that are symptomatic to receive a PCR because a lot of times if a student is symptomatic takes an antigen test and it comes back negative, because they have symptoms, they typically recommend to get a PCR. So we just cut that off of the chase and offer the PCR to make sure that we address that right away. So we have the option for antigen and the rapid test and the PCR test. So we really like being able to have that option, and we'll be able to have access to those 5 days a week.
I guess I was thinking more like if we've got, in this mass optional situation and we've got a whole class that we got to test or that wants to test or that their parents say, yeah, I want my kid tested, does that take up an obscene amount of time? I guess I'm trying to figure that out.
Yeah, it would require, we require, obtaining parent permission. It would require, obviously contacting each parent. It would require, obviously, the professional that would be administering that, their time. And, so yes, it would take a large amount of time. Now, I will say that if we would, depending on whether they have symptoms, we would only test based on the date of exposure. So we typically want to wait about 5 days based on the date of exposure because it takes 4 to 7 to 8 days sometimes for COVID to incubate and to actually show up on a test.
Okay. So has there been any discussion on how we will handle bullying? Like I've been getting a lot of emails about, well, if you guys are mask optional and my kid wants to wear a mask, what if they get bullied for wearing their mask? Or the opposite, if you guys are mask optional and my kid has a note from the doctor saying that they don't need to wear a mask and they're being bullied, is there anything that we're doing different, or we will follow the standard bullying protocols?
Yeah, so schools have protocols for that in place to report bullying to a trusted adult. We also have anonymous bullying report system for that as well. And so we would follow the structures that we have in place and that have been effective at our schools.
Okay, thank you. And then the last question I have, this may be a Jay or, I've been getting emails from teachers about being sued because they are unvaccinated if they give a kid COVID. And I guess I just want to know, who does that teacher ask those questions to, or has that been discussed, or where we're at with that?
Yeah, so we will provide information on that to our administrators to share with our teachers. And I'm not sure if Mr. Vogel or Mr. White want to comment further on the legal side of that.
Mrs. Sandage, we are working on getting information out to staff as to what our mandates are from the board and what we can do to make certain that they are provided comfort in regards to how best they can proceed teaching in the classroom, whether they're vaccinated, unvaccinated, and those kind of things. I'm going to work with Mr. Schultz in getting that information out. We'd like to be able to get that out this week, but I can't commit to Mr. Schultz's schedule or my schedule matching up that quickly. But yes, we want to get it out.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I know each board member has heard quite a bit of information, so I'd just like to give everybody one more opportunity. Ms. Blackwell?
So I know that we are going to be potentially bringing this back up for a vote tonight. And I have some information written down that I want to be able to say. Is this the time to say it, or would you like me to wait until?
This is the time. Discussion's on the floor.
Alrighty. So, hang on, let me make sure. I've got a lot of papers, so if I get a little discombobulated, I apologize. But first and foremost, let me just say this. I haven't forgotten that our primary goal is the education of these children. I've worked in healthcare through this entire pandemic. I've seen many of my family and friends have this virus. Most of them with no symptoms worse than that of a bad cold. The loss of taste and smell is definitely not fun, and they've had some issues with that have followed months later. I've also seen some people with other health issues, unfortunately obesity and lung disease being two of the most common that I've seen, that don't do very well with COVID. Sometimes having to be hospitalized with pneumonia. We've all watched the news day in and day out. Wear a mask, don't wear a mask. Shut the earth down. Everyone come out now. Don't visit your family. Now it's okay to come and see your family. Shut down the schools and now open them again. Questions that I've asked that have gone unanswered about these quarantines and the contact tracing, and have any of these children actually tested positive after they have been quarantined for 7 days or 10 days or 14 days or however many days at that time seemed logical. Has anyone tested the 38% per the EPA? I have this information right here that these masks that the children wear that are single cloth masks are about 38% effective per the EPA, that they wear day in and day out for what nasty germs that they might be harboring. A group of parents in Florida did. It was disgusting. We are teaching our children that even though they are the least affected by this virus, proof based on the fact that they now say that it doesn't matter how close the kids are to each other, as long as the adults stay 6 feet, as long as the children have these masks on, it's okay. They can be as close as they need to be together. We're teaching our children to be terrified. We have made these poor kids believe that if they spread this virus, by the way, they've shown to be the least spreaders, that they could kill their grandparents. What are we doing to them? Get a vaccine if you want to. Wear a mask if you want to. These guidelines in the toolkit are not proven effective. I have an example today. Regarding the exposure, and I'm going to read this to you. Exposure to COVID-19 or being in close contact with a case is defined as being physically exposed within 6 feet of another person or 15 minutes cumulatively, not 15 minutes consecutively. Everything that we've done has been 15 minutes consecutively, but it specifically points out that within a 24-hour period, with or without a cloth mask covering, for the example, 5 minutes I see you at breakfast time, 5 minutes I see you at lunchtime, and 5 minutes I see you at dismissal. That's 15 minutes cumulatively. So I can't say hello to you in the morning, see you in the afternoon for lunch for 5 minutes, and then maybe see you for 5 minutes before I leave, and that's considered a 15-minute exposure to someone. That doesn't make any sense. Wow. I hear people say
Blackwell, I'm going to interrupt you. Guys, we have got to have no interruption from the audience, okay? We need to have this discussion, and it interrupts us to hear each other, okay? So no interruption from the audience, okay? Thank you.
Okay. These guidelines in the toolkit are not proven effective. No one can give data if the quarantines are even necessary. These kids are being plucked out of school because they might have been exposed. Then prove to me and show me the data that it works and is necessary. I hear people say that if my kid is vaccinated and wearing a mask, but your kid isn't, then my kid has to be unfairly quarantined. And quite frankly, I agree with you. It's ridiculous. For those that want to say that I make my decisions based on my politics, I say, who do you think is in charge of the school mandates? The state. Who do you think runs the state? Elected officials. Whether you want to admit it or not, this is all political. This is what we are dealing with here. One big political machine, and we are just pawns in their game. And I will not vote to mandate masks for these children.
Mr. Walter?
I don't really think this board is qualified to make health decisions. I mean, last year it was the governor who decided it was a crisis and gave us executive orders on what everybody should do. It's not just a school issue, it's a community issue. That's asking us to decide what's proper, which is true and what is not. I've gotten so many emails I can't count them all. There's always a counterpoint to everything that I've read. On one side, saying, listen to the experts. Listen to the experts. Well, they got experts on both sides. You have doctors on both sides. That puts us in a bad position to trying to figure out what exactly is truth and what isn't. So that I'm concerned with. Just from my perspective, I don't believe that our kids are going to wear masks properly. And part of all the stuff that's been read says it's got to be worn properly for it to be effective. But you expect kids to not touch their masks all day and keep it, wear it. I don't think that's really realistic. I do think it affects our teaching and learning to our kids. I think it's very hard for teachers to communicate with children when everybody's wearing a mask. And then I do think, as Laura mentioned, there is some mental health aspect to this thing. So those are concerns that I have. And then on the other side, you tell me that, we got to keep, we're all here to keep kids in school. And if I don't tell someone to put a mask on, that we're sending kids home because of quarantines. And quarantines are expensive. The time involved for teachers to try to contact trace, the time to find childcare for families to keep kids out, that to me is the biggest thing that's really disappointing to me. If that's really what we have to do, is to keep kids in school. If we can keep kids in school without that, and if we do, we need out. I mean, you can't just say, okay, we're going to require masks and not have any idea of when that mandate might end. There needs to be a metric of some sort. Say it's 10%. If it's below 10%, it's optional. If it's above 10%, it's mandatory. I don't know, but there needs to be an out. We can't just have everybody wondering, well, when's the board going to meet again to come up with a different decision? We can't leave people hanging like that. So I do think we ought to have an exception for medical And then I still have a hard time understanding why if somebody's vaccinated, we need to require them to wear a mask. Those are my comments.
Mr. Furr?
Well, I got quite a few things wrote down, but sometimes it's better not to say them. But I totally, absolutely, 100% agree with Ms. Blackwell, and I've been consistent from the get-go. If I was convinced these masks work, I'd be okay. But I just don't believe they're like she said, I think it was 38% accuracy or whatever. I've been to schools. I've seen the kids wear the mask below their nose, on their chin, and that's just natural. They're 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. So our expectations of wearing a mask properly is just it's not going to happen. So I'm just sticking where I've been from the get-go.
Ms. Carpenter?
Well, people do as they see others do. And a lot of times they follow the example that's set for them. But one of the things, we look around us, what's going on around us right now, and right now, as was stated earlier, we're at 12.9%, Rowan's at 18.2%, Mecklenburg's at 12.6%, Stanley 15.6%, and Union County's 13.8%. You talk about setting the metric. I'm all for setting the metric if we have to. I mean, because people do want to know. This would be a temporary thing, because I think parents need to know that we're not saying we're going to do this forever. I would be more than happy. I know that some people say, well, let our task force set that, but I'd be willing to put it in the motion. I would say 5% is a good thing to say when it gets to that percentage. But if you want to put that into the motion, I'm more happy to put it in the motion to say when it reaches 5%, to say let them come off. But I would be willing to do that. But one of the things, I think it has been proven. Personally, I have been, but again, I don't want to say personally, because people say you're putting your personal feelings into it. But I know that I, myself, have not had a cold, have not had the flu, have not had anything in the last 18 months, because I have taken washing my hands, I have wore a mask, I have been vaccinated. I have not even had a cold because I have taken the precautionary measures. But before that, I had colds, I had bronchitis, I had pneumonia, I had all those things. But I had taken the precautionary measures, had done all those things, but it was everything together. It wasn't just masks by themselves, but I took all the things in the things. But the toolkit itself says do all the things, not just the mask. But again, you have to do everything together. But some people, all the documents, just like numbers, you can find something to back up everything you want to back up. It's not just that. You can find information. You can Google anything and find anything you want to support your for or against. But we are here to educate. Our job is to make sure we educate the children, and we do it as safely as possible. You parents send the children to school in the morning, and you want us to return them to you as safely as possible in the afternoon, educated as best as possible. That is what our job is to do, and we want to do it as safely as possible as we can. And to keep them safe. And that's what our job is to do. So that's what we want to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Adcock?
This past weekend, I decided to go out to 3 different restaurants in Concord, and all 3 restaurants I went into were full of people. No one had masks on. parents, their children, their grandparents, their friends, their families are all sitting at tables eating 30 minutes, an hour. And so it's really hard for me to understand why our state expects our public school system to be the ones that are going to break the COVID. I mean, COVID numbers are already there. What is that going to do to our kids? The thing that bothers me the most about this, and this is something that I feel like as a board we have no control over, is that the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services has made it impossible for schools to go mask optional, because the operational inefficiencies are going to happen in our school system when we have 100% of our students back in our buildings, and we are trying to control contact tracing. We are going to try to control quarantines. We're going to have kids out. We're going to have parents at work that are going to have to figure out how to take care of their kids for 10 days. I am voting for masks in the schools because I want these kids to stay in school 5 days a week. I want them to get educated. And if that means they wear a mask until these numbers come down, then I'm changing my vote to mask mandate.
Dr. Kopicki, we'll give you an opportunity to comment.
So the first thing I want to say to the board is I commend all of you on your comments this evening, because you've done your homework and you've done your research and you're passionate about your beliefs. And what I hear from all of you is focus on kids and what's best for kids. While we may have disagreement as to what that outcome ultimately ends up to be this evening, you are all really focused on the right thing, which is kids. And I commend you for that, and I appreciate the fact that you've done your homework and your research. With that, there are some things that you've said this evening that have made me, I won't say pause, but think through some things that I think we can do to try and help both our teachers, our parents, our students, our board members, our community, in terms of continuing to tackle this issue. Some of the concerning things are obvious. The case numbers are up. The percentage of the positives are up. The hospitalizations are up. The case counts between the ages of 5 and 18 are up. Keeping in mind our 12-year-olds and under are not vaccinated and can't be vaccinated, which is a big concern for all of us. Whether you want to mask or not mask, that's a reality and a fact. Mr. Schultz, correct me if I'm wrong, but you gave the Cabarrus County Schools metrics this evening to the task force, and 6 of the 7 are at tipping point that we can measure right now. The other 3 are not at the tipping point because kids are not back in school yet. So again, 6 out of 7 is a pretty high percentage that makes you concerned. I have a difficult time when I read the American Academy of Pediatrics report. The CDC, I'll agree, I think that they do the best they can. I do understand that they've switched quite a bit and moved along in very different avenues over the year. Keep in mind, they too are working and learning as we go through this pandemic. There is no perfect solution. The North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services is another one that makes me kind of raise my eyebrows. And then when I look at Duke University and you look at that ABC Collaborative, and Dr. Benjamin and Dr. Zimmerman, they're collaborative, the co-chairs of that study, they share the research conclusion. They said that first and foremost, that they solidified the effectiveness of masking in preventing the COVID-19 spread. All of it, they say, says the same thing. With masking in place, the secondary attack rate of the virus is really, really low. So these are the experts in the field. I'm not a medical doctor. I agree with Mrs. Blackwell when she points out to the fact that the politicians are making these decisions and they're forcing them down upon us and saying, hey, make this decision for us. It's a very difficult thing for all of us. No matter what side of the fence you're on, it's a very difficult decision. So I think we need to look at the data, which is the evidence that's in front of us. I think we need to really trust the medical experts, whether we believe in this or not. And I think at the end of the day, we're all talking about the same thing. We're talking about keeping kids safe. And again, I think that there are some things we can do. So the metrics for one. I think one of the things we can do, I've heard several board members talk about metrics. Mr. Walton, Mrs. Blackwell, Mrs. Carpenter, you've all talked a little bit about it. I can say as a superintendent of the school district, I can create a metric that measures case counts in schools. I can measure case counts in schools. I can measure grade levels. I can measure percentages. And I know we can do that effectively, and I think that's a good place to start for a metric that we can come in here and say to you, well, I think the information you've been given this evening and in the past, and I've seen Mr. Schultz give this report over the last couple of weeks, and in fact, not the last couple 6 months, he's been dealing with this issue along with his colleagues and has done a spectacular job in presenting the evidence. But I think we can do better in that sense. What I'm saying is I think one of the metrics we really want to know is what does that look like at J. Robinson High School? What does that look like at some of our elementary and middle schools? What are the numbers? How many kids are actually coming down with COVID in Central Cabarrus? And how many of them are 10th graders? And how many are 12th graders? And how many are 9th graders? What's the percentage? We can do that. That's not hard to do. I can definitely put that metric in place, and we can start that at the beginning of the school year, and we can report that out to the community on a weekly basis and to the board at every meeting. And I think that will give us, to some of the points I heard this evening, is our metric 5% of kids are across the board, are 5% of our first graders in all schools across the district coming down with COVID? Or is it only maybe 2% in one school and 8% in another school? What does that look like? And I think that would be a good metric for us to kind of put in place and take a look at. To Mrs. Adcock's comments, the operational inefficiencies of an optional mask system are going to be very cumbersome and difficult. Whether you want to agree with that or not, it's just going to be very difficult. The goal is to have kids in school and be in person. We can do that, and we can do that safely. But we have to apply some practical common sense initiatives to that so that we can do it in an efficient manner. So what I would say is, for us, and I do agree with again, the other comment, the 3 cumulative 5-minute periods, I find that to be kind of almost ridiculous. How do you account for that? I understand the 15 minutes in one spot at one time, under 6 feet, but if it's 5 minutes in the morning, 5 in the afternoon, and 5 in the evening, and you come down with COVID, when did you catch it? It's very difficult. You start reading some of these things, and that's what causes a lot of the dissension and the confusion, because we're all reading 9 different things. So I understand that, and I can empathize with all of you. But I would say to you that I will create a metric that will look at the schools individually by grade level, by school, and we'll have some really good data to look at. But I am going to recommend that to the board that I think we begin the school year masked. I think it's the best way to go. I think it's the most efficient way to go. And most importantly, I think with everything rising and the unknown, because we really don't know, the unknown, I think the charge that keeps coming back to me is our job number one is to keep kids safe. We can agree whether they should be masked or not masked, but the research and some of the solid evidence by the medical experts that are out there indicates that masking does reduce transmission, it does reduce spread. So my recommendation based upon that would be to recommend that we begin the school year fully masked. And come back each week to the community and the board and report the metrics that we have developed, and you can say, these are the percentages. And if they're off the charts, then we'll know, and if they're not, we'll know too. And that may give us a little better information as to some of the future decisions that we can make. So that's where I would end on that this evening. And again, I'm very impressed with the board and the comments that you've made and the research that you've done. You're very well informed on it, and I don't envy the position you sit in, because you're being tasked with an almost undeliverable decision that you have to make. So I thank you for your time, and that would be my recommendation to the board.
Thank you. So, Mr. Schultz, do you mind returning to the podium? So just a couple questions that I actually have. I know today that's not an updated slide, because this morning's report said positivity rate was down to 10.9. Is that right?
So the county reports it weekly. They receive that usually on Wednesday of every week. So I'm not sure if you were looking at the state that had the daily positivity rate, but that fluctuates from day to day depending on the day. It could go as low as 8 and then sometimes as high as in the teens. Yeah.
Right. I know we're normally on those calls every Monday at 9 o'clock. I wasn't on there, so I just want to make sure that was clear. So Cabarrus County's is still at 12.9?
12.9 based on last Wednesday's report, yes.
Okay. All right. And so, this is such a complex, people think it's not, but it is. There's a lot of information. People don't understand how much information we get every single day. And that's what we need, to make a good decision, because ultimately there are 7 people up here that have to make this decision. Everybody's got an opinion and a position, and, they're all important, and we're all parents, and there's teachers, and there's administrators, and there's, people that are responsible at the health departments. But 7 people up here have to make this decision, and it is extremely hard. And, we get hit really hard for positions we take, good or bad, positive, negative, it just doesn't matter. And that's okay, that's what we signed up for. Well, we didn't all sign up for this, but this is what we're charged with right now. So I want to make sure that people are very clear that this is different from last year. At this time last year, we all said, oh, vaccines are going to be here and we're going to be good. Everybody's going to be able to return to a normal school year. We're going to get vaccinations. Life's going to be great. Well, that's not what has happened. So now we have to back up, regroup, and start over again. And with that being said, that means this school kit, which I want you to explain a little bit more what the toolkit is, because my phone is blowing up that people do not understand what has that got to do with anything. They don't get it. That's really some of our marching orders from the state, if you will. So can you explain a little bit about what the toolkit, what those guidelines are and how they impact us?
Yes, I absolutely will. And this is the toolkit. It's a 20-some page document that guides everything from not just the controversial masking, but also what to do, protocols if students are exposed. It talks about cleaning, it talks about distancing between students, distancing between adults in the building. So it really is our guide, and has been our guide since the beginning of last school year, when the state of North Carolina put that together. So it has a lot of recommendations really for everything that guides the daily process of school related to COVID.
So, and then also, I want people to understand why we do not have a remote, not virtual academy. They get very confused. Why we do not have a remote learning option this year.
Right, so it's mandated that we provide face-to-face instruction at every school.
From the state level.
Right.
That there are the officials above us that tell us what we can and can't do. I think that's where it becomes a little difficult, because the governor got on television and said, we're going to pass this down to the state or to the local Board of Education to make the decisions. We're not going to mandate, we're just going to require. But then with that came other restrictions that we have to abide by. No remote learning. Quarantine doesn't change. That's held at the state level with the health departments, which are pushed down to the local level. So there are things we have to abide by, even if we are the ultimate body that makes that decision. And I hope that most people understand that with our viewing audience and those that are here. So with that, we hear you, Dr. Kopicki, and we appreciate your comments. We hate that you've had to start this night, with this situation, but it's the way we have to start the school year. So with that, I would just ask if there's anybody else that has an additional comment, question. If not, I would open the floor for a motion, and I'll read the one that we kind of started with if you do not have one or want to amend what we talked about.
Can I say something?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, I would just like to take this opportunity to thank the new superintendent for making a recommendation. Whether I agree with it or not, at least he's got guts enough to make a recommendation.
Okay, so I'm not hearing anything from the board members, so I'll start and then we can just open up the floor for discussion. So I'd ask for a motion that we mandate masks for students and staff effective immediately, that we continue to comply with the North Carolina Strong Schools Toolkit, that we reevaluate this in 30 days or at the 20th day count. I know that will be real important, so maybe we want to use that verbiage. And with that, I will ask for a second or open up the floor for discussion.
Well, you need to add too that we add buses to that, or does that
Well,
say
it catches
that?
everybody. It's a mandatory mask, and that was already there anyway. So students and staff means mandatory everybody.
Well, I know we
I can
had,
do
on
that.
our other one, we said that it would be mandatory on buses, so we had added that in our last one. Now, in the toolkit, does it specify, because I would like it making sure that if we can add distancing, the toolkit may say distancing, but I want to make sure if distancing is you know, they can do it because the toolkit and in everything I've read, I think I have read more now than I have ever read in my life. And thanks to many of the viewing audience, both ways, I do appreciate everything because, like I say, I have read everything. But if we can do that, if distancing 6 feet, 3 feet, whatever they can do, like I say, when we get to the high school level, I know it's going to be very, very difficult, but I do want that in there.
Well, to make this a little easier, how about you amend the motion and you add the verbiage that you would like so we can have discussion to amend the motion and you add the verbiage.
I would do an amendment that we, in the amendment, what you had, plus adding that it be enforced on school buses, all school buses, face coverings on school buses, social distancing, at least 3 feet if possible, 6 feet for teachers or staff.
So let me just interrupt you because I'm not sure that was really clarified. I think where the issues came in with why they updated the toolkit on social distance, because now this year we have, you know, almost, 100%, you hope, of kids returning where we didn't have that large percentage last year.
But I said if possible.
But are you going to say 3 feet or where social
3
distance possible?
feet if possible, 6 feet if possible. And I'm saying if possible because they've already stated, or as Brian stated, sometimes when you got 24 in a class, it's not possible. But I'm saying if possible to do it because it says that's very, all the doctors, many doctors wrote, they say that social distancing is that, washing your hands, all those things go hand in hand. But you're saying follow the toolbox, but if they took it out of the toolbox, it's not going to be in the toolbox. That's why I'm adding that.
True.
So that's why I'm saying the 3 feet if possible, 6 feet for the teachers if possible. So, you know, I'm saying do it if possible. That's, and then the metrics. If, you know, I would say, you know, when we get to 5%, because when you look on ours, at 5%, we're in the good range. That's why I would put 5%. Now, the floor's open if somebody, but on our little chart we had, on our rubric, when we got to 5%, we were in a good range. So I would say 5% or below we'd look at it. But now, that's just my suggestion.
Okay, I'll just comment to that. I spoke to the Stanley County chair and vice chair, and they've done something similar, but they use 7.9. And I think some of the other counties that have used metrics have went a little higher, so I'll just put that out there just for a little bit of discussion. Mr. Schultz, would you like to speak to that? And I think the other issue I'd like to make sure that's real clear is only if they're masking will quarantine not be an issue, correct? And with that being said, if quarantining becomes an issue, we're back to teacher shortages, kids at home without remote learning, kids home maybe once, twice, 3 times a year if they become a close contact again and need to be quarantined. So some of those things that were coming through in the emails, the questions were, is that the case? Is that going to happen? Would you speak to some of that as well?
Yeah, so your first question is about wearing masks properly. So yeah, so in order not to quarantine, the masks have to be worn properly and consistently with the students, yes.
And if the quarantining, so wearing properly, here we go again with that discussion, and we're going to do that again. So the emails are asking us, who is there a box? So the question is, when they do a contact tracing, that box asks, and I know this sounds very condescending, and I don't mean it that way, but does it ask if somebody's questioning if those masks were being worn properly, or just you're checking the box that the masks were being worn? And those are the emails we're getting. So we really need to answer those questions. I think board members need to understand, you know, the complete definition of wearing masks properly, because that's really never been stated before.
Yeah, it's if they're wearing them properly.
And then who's policing that?
So so when we do a contact tracing, you have to talk to either the teachers whose classroom the students were in, or you're pulling, if they're in a large setting, a bus, then you're sometimes have to pull a video recording.
So I think that's another thing that people are familiar with, that we've all talked about how do y'all know this? What measures do you take to look at that they don't realize that they are pulling the school videos, that they're looking at those. You might want to speak to that they really truly are going back and look at bus cameras, and they're looking at where they were located, what the seating chart looked like, if they were wearing masks. If you want to speak to that.
Yeah, that's correct. And each bus has a camera on it. There's a video box on there, and it's actually like a cartridge that actually has to be pulled, put into a machine, and then viewed.
Can I ask a question? Okay, thanks. So what we're hearing you say again, and let me just repeat this to make sure that I understand this correctly, that as long as both parties are wearing a mask, there will be no quarantining necessary.
That's correct.
Okay, so I have a question, because on this toolkit, in the statement that I read earlier, it specifically says, and it's underlined, with or without a cloth face covering, with or without, that they will be quarantined. Now, this is the most updated one as of August the 10th. It's the same paragraph that I read just a few minutes ago about 5 minutes at arrival, 5 minutes at lunch, 5 minutes at dismissal. So are you guaranteeing us that based on the toolkit, that if two parties are masked properly, they will not be quarantined?
Yeah, so let me go back to the slide that I showed earlier. So if you look at number 3, this is pulled from the toolkit, and this is page 15 under the header of confirmed positive COVID case. And this is from the toolkit that was updated on August 10th, third bullet under quarantine. So this is the exception. Students who are not fully vaccinated after close contact in a classroom or other school setting, if masks were being worn appropriately and consistently by both the person with COVID and the potentially exposed person, do not need to quarantine.
Thank you for that clarification. And also, I would like, because I have a feeling this vote is not going to go the way that I vote. However, I would like to request that when you do vote for this mask mandate, that you also mandate a mask break for these children so that they have time to be able to breathe fresh air at some point during the day, because they will get headaches. They will start to get fatigued. And so that's one thing that I would really ask that we please do for them. Thank you.
And Mrs. Blackwell, I agree with that 100%. We should definitely put in, I don't want to say a rule, but there should definitely be periods of the day where kids are able to take mask breaks. That's something that is being done consistently throughout the country, to my knowledge. Well, I know a lot of schools are doing that, so I think that's a very fair and reasonable request.
Okay, and to Mrs. Blackwell's point, that is an issue that we have to deal with a lot with emails. People are very concerned that kids, and I'm not sure people really even think about that those students, adults can take breaks, people can walk out of their classrooms, they can go and do things, a little bit differently. But those kids, especially bus riders, now that, and it's been a mandate, wear that mask from the time they get on that bus until the time they get back off of it. That could be 8, 9, 10 hours a day. That's a very long time. I had a couple that had just sent me and said, this is not a big ask of kids. They're willing to do whatever it takes to get back in school and to stay, and that's true. But I think a part of that is what we really are asking, to visualize that picture of what we really are asking kids to do, is because the kids are probably the only ones that are literally having to wear those for 8, 9, 10 hours without a lot of mask, because they're in class. So I do agree that that's extremely important. Any other comments?
Yeah, I'll just add to that, it's permissible outdoors to have.
Do they outdoors? Yes, recess and that type thing. But during the daytime, because that's only 15, 20 minutes at a time, then their break time in cafeteria. But that's probably a good question we need answered. Have they already had those in place? Was that utilized last year? I
So
don't-
remember, at the end of last year, we actually lifted the outdoor mask mandate.
Okay. Ms. Adcock?
That was the clarification I was wanting, was because I heard you say before that the kids will not have to wear a mask if they're outdoors for recess, if they take a break for lunch and their teacher takes them outside, that they will not have their mask on. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. So we did that. I can't remember what the date was, but it was early May when that happened last school year.
Okay. Any other, yes.
Had two. One, I'd like to see this applied to when students are present, because I don't think we need to apply it to our folks working on our buses, our folks in offices, and for that matter, our board. Are we going to wear masks now? Is that our plan? Everyone here wear masks too? Or is it just in a school setting like what the toolkit was designed for? And then secondly, I'd like us to consider allowing for a medical exemption if a parent or a doctor feels that there's a medical reason why a student shouldn't wear a mask, they should be exempted.
Yeah, we did have the medical exemption in place last school year. Typically, students that aren't physically able to take a mask on, mask off. There were students with disabilities who received a medical exemption, and there's a
Right.
process for that. So that the
Well, as long as we have something. I mean, we've heard some speakers last week that really have concerns about their child. May not meet that standard, but there's a medical issue there that they should be able to at
absolutely.
least justify an exemption.
Okay, so this is really going to get to be a long motion. I would like to ask the board members, Ms. Carpenter put a number on the floor for a metric of 5%. Do all of you agree with that? I know some other counties have went a little higher. Where are we on that?
Love for the task force to tell us the metric, but
Well, for
don't-
tonight, and we either have to include it or leave it out. What is the pleasure of the board?
I would have went higher. I don't
You
know.
would not, or you?
I would have, but I don't really have,
Would you
I'm
like
not
to make a
expert enough to tell you.
Right, but would you like
8%
to make a
maybe, whatever.
suggestion?
8.
So I'm hearing 8 from Mr. Walter. So I'm going to ask each one of you about that piece of it before I read this again. So, Ms. Sandich, where are you at on a metric?
I'd like to see if our task force could give us a recommendation. I don't feel comfortable giving one. I think if we list a motion to suggest that we can get that information from the task force. I guess if we put it that way.
I'm hearing leave it out for now.
That's correct, and then allow for our task force to meet and to the metrics team, as Brian suggested, and Dr. Kapiki suggested, to give us a metric. Because that task force includes, like the Health Alliance, nurses, things of that nature, so
Okay.
I'd feel safer that way.
Okay. Ms. Blackwell?
Hey, at this point, it's whatever you guys want to, whatever you guys want to do at this point. I'm voting no, so.
Okay, so, okay, go ahead. Kia, Ms. Carroll.
And I think I heard down that way, did you say someone from the the CH, or the Health Alliance is on that task force? Because that's
We
what I
have
would
several
want.
representatives on the task force from the.
They
Health
do,
Alliance,
okay,
yes.
because that would be my only concern. If we've got somebody from the Health Alliance on there, then that's fine with me, as long as we've got representation on there from the Health Alliance. That's fine with me, because that would be, that would be fine to have somebody come back on that then.
Mr. Schultz, would you like to give us a rundown of who is represented? And
Yeah,
just
so
not
I was
names,
going to
but-
say, it's a representative group that includes teachers, administrators, parents, business people, Atrium Health, and the Cabarrus Health Alliance, to name a few, actually an elected official as well. And
Yeah.
2 board members.
The only reason I put that number, if you look at our rubric, the 5% is in the good range, and that's why I said that. When we were in the 5% range, it was, we were in the, see, when you 5 to 10%, when you're 5 and below, we're in that green containment area. And that's why I said 5%. I knew we were good then. And that's why I wanted it to say 5% and below. We were green, we were contained. And I would say that would be a good time to not have masks. And that's why I said that. Because you were moderate, you know, and you're in the blue. I would rather be in green. But if we have somebody from Atrium and the Health Alliance, that's fine.
I think it's important that the board agrees with whatever we come up with, because we can't keep leaving parents out there to not knowing, just waiting for the board to meet and maybe change their mind, maybe not. There just needs to be a number there so we can know.
Okay, Mr. White, would you like to, Ms. Adcock, did you have something else?
I was just going to say, too, the metrics that Dr. Kopicki was talking about that will give us individual schools and then the age group of children in our school system, those percentages could also be used as a metric. I'd like to add that into the task force recommendations.
Okay, Mr. White.
In hearing what everybody has said, the one person I have not gotten a full understanding about with Mr. Walter is from the board as to whether this motion would apply to the board, or is it just the students and the staff? From hearing what Madam Chair said in her motion and the potential amendment to Mrs. Carpenter, I think I've encompassed it in what y'all may be talking about if you want to hear it as a suggestion. It is all children and staff in pre-K to 12 grades shall wear masks indoors, including school buses, unless actively eating. Then children should maintain 3-foot distance to the fullest extent possible. Children will be allowed breaks throughout the day. I don't know what that would look like, but and that there would be a medical exemption may be applied for due to an issue that is exacerbated by COVID. Is that correct, Mr. Schultz? And that does not address the cumulative 15 minutes that was a concern by Mrs. Blackwelder and Mr. Furr. So that would be, I think that encompasses what the discussion was. The one thing it does not have in there as whether the board wants to implement it for the board members as well, or everybody in the room. I think that's what y'all want to do, but I didn't put it in there because I didn't hear a consensus.
Yes,
feel
please.
what's
I'm going to have
good
Dr. Kopicki to address this before I just, okay.
So I believe if we're going to enforce it amongst our schools, that our adults should be there as well. So it should be across the district, that our adults should be wearing masks as well, board members, meeting members, wherever we meet. If we're going to put a mask mandate in place, I think we all should be wearing masks. I mean, so let's lead by example.
Board members are all in agreement for that?
I agree. What's good for the goose is good for the gander.
What that would set, the change would be all board members, children, and staff in pre-K. Well, all board members, children and staff in pre-K to 12 grades shall wear indoors. So if they're outdoors, they don't need a mask. The idea about breaks throughout the day, to sit here and say it's every 10 minutes, every 10 minutes of every hour, I think that's maybe overstepping and letting the staff make a decision about what helps them throughout the day, So that may address the motion that was started by Madam Chair and was wanting to be amended with Mrs. Carpenter's.
Okay, the only thing I didn't hear is when we're going to reevaluate this, because I think that's extremely important. I know we're going to send it back to the task force to work with Dr. Kopicki to make a recommendation, but do we want to reevaluate that at our September meeting or after the 20th day count, which I know is really important?
Yes, what you could do is just add to the very end that this will be addressed. You can do it at every business meeting. That would eventually get us to a 20-day count, or you can start it after the 20-day count, which I'm not, if it starts August the 23rd, so 20 days will be about the middle of September. So that may be at the next business meeting anyway.
So then what's the purpose of the metric if we're just going to talk about it every time?
Well,
It doesn't make sense. We either agree on a metric or we don't.
but if you don't know what the metrics are, how are you going to put the metric? I would be concerned about putting metrics in the motion tonight. If it's
Yeah, so
discussed,
do
then
we
you
trust,
can.
do we trust the task force or we don't, I guess. is what-
I know, but we have to actually get that first report back from the task force to make sure that we agree with it. So that's what I think Mr. White is saying.
Well, as long as at the next meeting we make a decision on that, I think it's important. I don't think we should be continuing to push it off every month and talk about it again.
Okay, well, we may not have to do it every month, but I think we have to establish one more report back from the task force and what they are going to recommend. All right, board members, anything else? Does the motion cover all that we've discussed?
Well, let me add, does this address it, Mr. Walter? This will be addressed at each business meeting with input and guidance by the task force? Or do you
I
want
would have
metrics?
said wait at the next meeting, a decision will be made on a metric.
Okay.
But also, are we asking the people to wear a mask in their offices when there's nobody else around? I think that's kind of ridiculous too, but anyway, I mean,
Okay, now I want to make sure I just heard what you said. Are you saying that we are going to address it at our next business meeting?
I think we ought to adjust it at our next meeting. If we can't agree with it tonight, I think the next meeting is the best option to me. And I think the best option out there for, I mean, people, they want to know. They just don't want us to keep continuing like we did last year. And
Well,
what's
you
the board
just
going
said
to
we
do?
weren't going to address it at every meeting, so I just want to make sure we're.
I would like to make a decision as soon as possible. And apparently, if we don't have the numbers now, we'll have the numbers at the next meeting. That makes sense?
Okay, all right. Anything else? Board members? Does that cover everyone's comments? Do you need to speak?
No.
Okay, so Mr. White has crafted a motion. May I have a motion from a board member that agrees with those?
You want me to restate it? and then-
Absolutely.
Okay.
Please.
Restate the motion, Mr. White.
So, from what I'm hearing, it would be all board members, children, children and staff in pre-K to 12th grade shall wear masks indoors, including school buses, unless actively eating, then children should maintain 3-foot distance to the fullest extent possible. Children will be allowed breaks throughout the day. A medical exemption may be applied for due to an issue that is exacerbated by COVID. This matter will be addressed at the next business meeting of this school board.
Well, we have the teachers at 6
Ms. Carpenter,
feet.
will you key up, please?
Oh, excuse me. We had the children at 3 feet and the teachers in that toolkit is 6 feet. Adults, teachers were, in the toolkit, they did have the teachers adults at 6 feet. Wasn't that at 6 feet before?
And that's it, eating or just any time?
No,
The language in the toolkit.
Mr. Schultz, I hate to ask you, but would you come to the mic, just so the viewing audience can hear as well?
The language for adults is 6, it actually says unvaccinated adults is 6 feet. So that is the recommendation in the toolkit.
was it unvaccinated?
Yeah, it specifically says
Oh, okay,
unvaccinated.
well, if you want to put it that way, that's fine.
But I think with the understanding that nobody's policing vaccination status.
Yeah, well, anyway, but just say 6 feet, and that way. But it's, if possible, still put that if possible in there. Because again, as Kim mentioned, because when we were over at Wolf Meadow, one of the things the first graders and the kindergarten teachers said, it's not possible to teach a kindergartner or a first grader how to form their letters at 6 feet away. You can't do it. So that's why I said, if possible. You can't teach them to form their letters when you're 6 feet apart from them. So if possible, to keep the distance. That's why I'm saying, if possible, to do that. Because if you're trying to teach them to read or sometimes you can't do these things. So we don't, well, as I said, we're supposed to educate them, so let's educate them. So,
Mike, I'm sorry.
Again, in these conversations that we're having, I hear someone say that if they're vaccinated, but we're not going to be checking to see if they're vaccinated. And now you're saying that, you know, the teachers are not going to be able to teach them properly when they're young like that without being able to get close to them and form their words. So we're either asking them to adhere to this policy or we're not. It's not, it can't be whatever happens to be convenient that day. Like, if we're gonna, if it's gonna be put into place, then it needs to be put into place, because if not, then all of these metrics that we're trying to gather are meaningless, much like this toolkit.
Okay, so one of the questions is, when we are talking about vaccines, if we're saying mask is the magic answer, then nobody's going to want to go get vaccinated. So that's probably a very legitimate response. If we're saying everybody just mask and we're not going to police that, and evidently we don't say it anyway. We say vaccinate should you not. But if we're not going to ask that, if masking is, where does that fall? And I'm talking about the toolkit. So I know we can be more stringent at the toolkit, but not less. So where does that fall in with the toolkit? We've said 3 feet. It really doesn't say that. Where are we in alignment with that toolkit?
Are you talking about regarding adults being 6 feet?
Right, and the vaccinations. Because this is my question. If we're not checking vaccines, and that's one of the indicators of whether they get quarantined or not on contact tracing, how are we doing that?
So in the contact tracing, you can ask people to volunteer that information. You cannot require them to give you that information.
Right, but then aren't we just back to, if you don't know, you have to take precautionary measures to quarantine them anyway?
Correct.
So if we, that just, it's a really hard, I get it that the mask is going to, guys, I'm going to ask you to be removed from the room, okay?
Okay, well, this is a joke.
Well, I'm sorry. This is a discussion we have to have. So if we're not, and the board just needs clarification, if we're not clear on whether the person is that has been exposed, that vaccination.
They can provide that information and quarantine for 0 days.
But if they will not or do not.
Then they'll have to either follow the 7-day guidelines or the 10-day guidelines.
And all the people that are around them.
No, that doesn't have anything to do with quarantining of other people, the masking.
Right, well, I'm talking about high school kids. Now we're not just talking about adults, we're talking about high school kids as well.
If a vaccinated person could test positive for COVID, but if they have a mask on, they're not, and other people have a mask on, then there is no quarantining of other students.
Period. So the vaccination really doesn't come into play there.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Are all board members understanding that piece of it? So really what we're ultimately saying, and have been, and this is what we're trying to get out there to the general audience, we're trying to prevent kids from being quarantined, teachers from being quarantined, so we don't have the shortages.
Correct.
In employees that we're having a hard time covering anyway. Give us the toolkit, the Strong's toolkit, as far as the social distancing. That was a question I got. What was the reasoning for their changing the social distancing? Because that was such a big factor last year.
Yeah, so as I said before, we've learned a lot, and the data that we have from North Carolina students and that experience that the legislators legislated to study that data and then study the impact of transmission within schools. It came back that regardless of distance, as I read on a previous slide, I can go back to it, regardless of distance, that the masking was the mitigating factor. So that is number 3. Physical distancing should not be the limiting factor for determining in-person instruction when appropriate, adherence to masking is present. And that was one of the key takeaways from the ABC Collaborative.
And they don't think that,
Key up, Ms. Carpenter.
so they don't think the distancing makes that much a difference? You're telling me?
That's what that was a key takeaway from the ABC Collaborative study of our students in
That's
school.
why I was a little bit concerned about putting the 3 feet in there, or as close as you can. I guess that takes care of it. But mandating that number, we're not in alignment with the toolkit. I know we can be more stringent, but that's not what y'all are recommending, correct?
So the toolkit, when it comes to quarantining, provides the exception for not quarantining students regardless of distance when all students are wearing a mask. So that goes back to the number 3 on the toolkit.
All right, Ms. Blackwell?
I would just, we're putting a lot of trust in a mask that's only 38% effective. We've been told multiple times that this virus only travels a certain amount of feet. And
6 feet.
3 to 6 feet, whatever the number happens to be at the time. But all I'm saying is that this has a lot of discrepancy, and I understand we're learning more and more about this virus as time goes on. But just make it make sense. That's all I want, is just to make it make sense. And right now, it just frankly doesn't.
So I would say to that, and I don't know if you want me to respond to that or not, but I will say that what we found in the spring when students came back to school, we did not see at our schools like Mount Pleasant, where we had 90% students return. We did not see a significant difference between another school, such as at Cox Mill, where 50% of students returned in transmission in school. So we saw that in our schools. We know that. So that's what we know, that we were able to return to school in the spring. Masks were required at that point, and we did not see significant transmission within the schools.
Again, please repeat that. We did not see significant transmission in the schools.
When masks were required.
I understand that, but what I'm saying is that at this point, there has been nothing to show. I mean, the numbers are increasing now, and these kids aren't even in school. So the transmission that's occurring now and these bump in numbers that we're hearing about, it's not even because we're in school. These kids are safer in school than they are anywhere else. We clean, we make sure everything is sanitary. School is going to be the safest place for these children at this point. And because there's so much discrepancy with numbers that we do and don't have, and changes with now you don't have to social distance, and these masks might be this effective but only if they're worn properly and if you're vaccinated, but you can still carry the virus and spread the virus if you're vaccinated. It just doesn't make sense. There's multiple things that are just off, and I'm sure that in 2 months from now we're going to hear something else. My guess is probably that masks aren't really all that effective, but that's just my personal opinion. But nonetheless, I will digress and let us do our little vote that we need
I
to
would
do.
agree with you. I think schools are
Keep
the
the
safest
6
place
and 3,
possible for
and if we
students,
don't
so
need it,
we need to keep them there as much as
better
possible.
keep-
Ms. Carpenter, will you unkey for just a minute? So Mr.
Well,
Schultz can, thank you.
Keep
Now-
the 3 and the 6, and then if we don't need it, we don't need it.
Okay, Mr. White, so can you restate that? And the only thing that I didn't hear was it needs to be effective immediately. We were asked about
Right.
that the last time.
So, okay, so I think this has got everything. Effective immediately. All board members, visitors to school buildings, children and staff in pre-K to 12th grades or 12th grade shall wear masks indoors, including school and activity buses. Unless actively eating, then children should maintain 3-foot social distancing to the fullest extent possible. Children will be allowed breaks throughout the day. Medical exemption may be applied for due to an issue that is exacerbated by COVID, staff shall socially distance at least 6 foot to the fullest extent possible. This matter will be addressed at the next business meeting of this school board. I think that covers what everybody has done or has talked about tonight.
Ms. Sandage?
I'd like to make a motion to accept the motion just reviewed by Attorney Jay White as it's presented.
And I'll second it.
Okay, I have a motion and a second, and the only thing I want to ask is, can you read to me about the task force again?
I did not put anything about the task force, but what they said, this matter will be addressed, this matter will be addressed at the next business meeting of this school board, which I did not put in the task force because, through guidance, we can put in, through guidance by the task force, or with guidance from the task force.
And presented by the superintendent for recommendation, maybe? Okay. I think I would like that verbiage in there, since we have asked that the task force
So this-
take a look instead of
This matter will be addressed at the next business meeting of this school board with guidance from the task force and recommendation by the superintendent.
Okay, hearing that, Ms. Sandage, are you okay with that, to keep your motion in place? Ms. Carpenter, are you okay for the second on that? Okay, so I have a motion on the floor by Ms. Sandage and a second by Ms. Carpenter, and I'm going to need a verbal yes or no from each of you. And I will start with Ms. Adcock.
Yes.
Ms. Carpenter.
Yes.
Mr. Furr.
No.
Key up, please.
No.
Mr. Walter.
A reluctant yes.
Absolutely no.
Yes.
Of course, it would come down to your board chair. Yeah, so we have three yeses.
Oh, you got 4 yeses.
No, I did not. So let me do that one more time. I'm sorry, Ms. Sandage, I actually put you a no. I should have known better. All right, so I have 4 yeses and 2 nos. And I'm going to have to say I'm going to have to go with the yeses, just because I feel it's very important to keep kids in school, and we need to make sure that they're there and the quarantine situation does not become a problem for students or staff. So I'll make that me a yes, and motion passes 5-2 in favor. Everyone good? Okay, thank you. Sorry, guys. Thank you. All right, guys, thank you. And with that, we will move on to items under our 12.01, and this is going to begin the approval of the Hartzland Williams and Vogel Law Firm Legal Services Contract and Resolution. May I have a motion that the Hartzland Williams Legal Services Contract and the resolution be approved as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Do I need to add, it's not in the motion piece of it? Oh, okay, well then let me just restate it, that's fine. So may I have a motion that the Hartzland Williams Legal Services, okay, and Vogel Law Firm Legal Services Contract along with the resolution be approved as presented?
So moved.
I have a motion by Ms. Blackwell,
Second.
a second by Mr. Furr. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Motion passes 7-0. And with that, we have taken care of all of our business items tonight. I would ask that we have a motion for adjournment.
Make the motion.
I have a motion by Ms. Sandage. Ms. Carpenter, can I include you as a second? Ms. Carpenter, a second. Ms. Sandage carried the motion. Motion by Ms. Sandage, second by Ms. Carpenter. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. And with that, we will say goodnight to our viewing audience. Thank you for those that were here with us tonight. We once again welcome Mr. Dr. Kopicki to the board, and look forward to seeing you at our September work session. Thank you and good night.